Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another day God has given us. We rejoice and praise Him. We are excited today to have one-on-one with TJK on this TJK Shares. As I promised you before, we bring you people from all over the world who have done transformational work, who are changing the world one area of the world at a time, one child, one community member, one person at a time. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have my brother Chris. Chris, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Humbled to be here, Jackson. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be in TKJ or TJK?
JK, yeah.
Okay. So my name is Christopher Muwanguzi Mugalu. I prefer, actually, believe it or not, to be called Muwanguzi or Mua. The name Muwanguzi was given to me by my mother when I was born. They didn't expect me to live, and I did, and I'm here. And God gave me the right and the story. But really quickly about me, so I'm a chief executive officer, a team leader at a small social impact organization in Uganda that is developing alternatives and solutions, sustainable solutions to orphanages or institutionalization. And we're doing it in Uganda, but we are using that evidence to show the world how to ensure that children are not separated from their families, how to strengthen communities, how to hold governments accountable, how to support supporters, donors, and investors to place their money where children will thrive and survive best.
Wow, you jumped at it, my man. I'm going to ask you questions about Child's Eye Foundation, the organization you lead, and how you got there. But take us back to that story, Muwanguzi. I know what it means. When I say Twesije and you say Muwanguzi, people can press us where we were. You are not supposed to live. Tell us a little bit about your mom and your dad and why you were not supposed to live.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much. My father actually died, Jackson, 31 years and 1 day ago today.
Oh.
So he died on the 7th of May. He was taken from us too early. He was a freedom fighter. He brought freedom, economic stability to Uganda. He was a community man. He believed in organizing right from the grassroots. He was a farmer and a businessman. And I have his name, Mugalu. And we remember him. So it's an honor to be able to talk about him today. So thank you.
Wonderful.
My mother is a phenomenal woman. She's still alive. She's still with us. Her name is Margaret. And if she ever watches this, hey, Mom, I learned almost everything from this woman. Patience, kindness, strategic thinking, the value of community, understanding people, aspiration. Oh man, my mom, I could go on. So my story about not living, in Uganda we have a saying, umwana mukulu, a child that is born to a lady who is in her older age.
Yes.
So my mom had me when I was 40. I was entangled in the umbilical cord in hospital. And by the way, her pregnancy was through a very traumatic experience. This is during the wars in Uganda. She went to Kenya to have me. And as I was being born, the doctor said, look, the baby's stuck and entangled. So we won't be removing a baby that will be living. And if we do, that baby will have struggled through this whole process. Therefore, the baby will have a few hours to live or a few minutes to live. So they placed me on the side and they told her, look, the baby's here, but the baby's blue, almost done. There's no oxygen. So say your goodbyes. And Jackson, a couple of minutes later, one of the doctors said, you know what, I think we should put this child in an incubator immediately. I think something's up. It looks like this child will get through this. So they did. 3 hours later, I was kicking. Apparently 6 hours later, I was doing more. I needed to be fed. And when they asked my mother, what do you want to call the child? She says, let me call the child Muwanguzi. Ajakuwangula. Let me call this child Victor, because he will be the victor. And so here I am.
Wow. See, that's why I love these interviews, Chris. Because we walk around, we do what we do. People see our posts on LinkedIn and the work, the impact is doing all over the world, but the story behind it is usually never told. And I will tell you this, 3 days ago, I spoke to somebody in Uganda, a friend of mine, who told me her friend had gone to a hospital and delivered a child. And when that child was born, they had one of each part. Like
wow.
One nose, one side of the mouth, one. And for me, I'm waiting to hear the Muwanguzi story. And they decided the doctor to give the child an injection, and the child was taken away. I said, why? And this person says to me, what would you do? I said, I would let the child live till they cannot. I'll let it be the natural death, not facilitated death.
That's right.
I'm so glad you shared this story. May your father rest in peace. So sorry about that. Your mom is Muwanguzi too. She believed, and here you are doing all this work. So given that background and how you were born and raised, what led you to become the child activist, the gender equity activist? What led you to become the man you are and to do the work you do now?
Yeah, look, in fact, I love this question, because my inspiration starts really from my childhood. It starts actually at the point that my father dies. You know, he dies because he's murdered. And I see an injustice, not just for me, because, Jackson, I never realized the impact my father had on our community. So the number of people that came to the funeral, the people who came to support us through it and supported us long after, the people I've met who remind me and say, I met your father a long time ago and this is what he did. So there was a real calling for me at that point. That's probably a first rite of passage, you know, my father's death. And I become this young man that's searching for support. And I get attached to the idea of building relationships with other boys and girls who have also lost their fathers, who have that loss in their life. Now, I'm about 13, and maybe 2-3 years later, I become identified by Straight Talk Foundation. Straight Talk is, yes, a big...
Talk about Straight Talk, yeah.
Yeah, health communication NGO in Uganda. I was the first radio presenter on Straight Talk. And they were interviewing guys, and I walk in and I tell them this story the same way I'm telling you, you know, my father died 3 years ago, because that was early in the days. This is how I'm feeling, and I'm searching, and they just loved my story. And they said, listen, can you record something for us? And I did. And they said, listen, would you like to be a presenter? So I start this journey talking about sexual health, sexual and reproductive health, relationships, choices, you know, all these things, women, girls' rights, the right to say no, understanding how to delay these decisions. I started talking about these when I was about 14, 15, and I was educating my peers. This thing was on 10 different stations, 10 different languages across the country. It was in newspapers. So that pelted me into a position to be a real champion as a peer, as a young person. So that's where my story starts. And to be honest with you, Jackson, the rest, as they say, is history.
and you know, you led so many people. I did a one-on-one interview right here on this channel with Humphrey Nabimanya.
Oh, yes.
Who basically took what you did and how he grew up and became a presenter at NBS, and now is leading this Reach a Hand Foundation.
That's right.
Well, our listeners, if you didn't watch Humphrey Nabimanya, go back. Now you know how that trend works and how these things begin with your own story that turns into huge, life-changing, impactful, transformational work that you do. That's how it all started. I remember Straight Talk, and I can tell you, those of us who were born and raised in the villages, getting on the radio to hear Straight Talk, first of all, you had to get the batteries, and then had the radio at all. And those of you who were doing Straight Talk at the time, I think my classmate Michael Bahinyoza was on Radio Uganda. And
Yes.
it was, woo, the celebs who can do it. But for young people who are listening, we are going to hear you say, I recorded and sent to Straight Talk. Why did you use to record at that time? Because you are not recording on the phone.
No. You know, actually, I always wanted to get into journalism, and they brought these BBC journalists to teach us. Because, you know, one of the big things about Straight Talk is they wanted to teach us, the Ugandans, to do it all on our own.
That's right.
And we used to use reels, you know, these old reels, and you would record, cut, tape, continue. Now we used to go out with mini discs to capture voices. We used to call it vox pops, and I traveled the whole of Uganda. There's nowhere I have not been. Karamoja, Rukunjiri, Teso, Sese Islands. Boss, I went everywhere, and we listened to young people telling us about their relationship stories, how they made decisions. But there were mini discs. Actually, before the mini discs, there were little tapes, because I remember the tapes used to get stuck and we had to rewind them. Then
With
you'd go to the studio, with a pen.
Radio cassettes. Yeah. The radio
The small
cassette.
ones, huh?
Yes, and you press the button record, and then two buttons go down, and you speak into, like we are speaking in a computer, only you are speaking to small. Wanted at least the young people who are born with these cell phones in hand and can and send and share and TikTok and Instagram to understand where the Muwanguzis started their recording. And then you ended up in Family Matters Institute. You ended up doing different jobs before you got to become the CEO of Charles I Foundation. What were the stops in between there?
Yeah, so really quickly, I mean, I left Uganda. So I worked for Straight Talk for a very long time. And then I went on to work on Radio Sanyu because I wanted to do some commercial radio. As you said, we had become very popular, myself and my presenters. There was a young lady called Sanyu Nkinzi Kagwa, who has gone on to lead a revolution in women's rights in the country. But I wanted to do commercial radio. So I did that for a while. And I learned that it wasn't exciting. I wasn't an activist anymore. I was an entertainer. There was a popularist movement to it. I had to be funny and do things. And I couldn't script my work and listen to people. I couldn't connect the way I used to. So I decided I wanted to go do a master's. And by the way, I was educated. My first degree was Makerere University. So I decided to go do a master's in the United Kingdom. And I came to the University of London and also the University of School of Audio Engineering. And I did my master's, which I passed very well. And I was extremely excited. So I took my learning to the BBC, where I had had some experience and connection. And sadly, I faced severe racism. You know, this is the racism I can reflect on now, but at that point, I had no idea. They put me in the basement, and the producer at that time said to me, you really won't amount to anything here at the BBC. BBC is meant for certain types of people.
Yes.
You go work in the records department. So I worked in the records department. In fact, I did the Idi Amin report. When Idi Amin died, I was one of the researchers in the records department who had to look at the archives and produce voices and vox pops and documentation of Idi Amin. And then when I realized I was going nowhere and not progressing, I left and I went back into charity and social impact. So I worked for Quorum. Quorum changed my life. 9 years in this charity, similar to the work I'm doing now, that was also demonstrating alternatives to children growing up outside families. And over there, I trained as a psychotherapist. I went to the Tavistock Institute, a very prestigious institute that is aligned with some of the most amazing historical study of psychology, psychiatry, and therapy in this country and across the world. Yeah. And then I decided to set up a consultancy to train people who were doing social work practice in the United Kingdom. And I developed a lot of training with something called the Children's Workforce Development Council. And we trained over 5,000 professionals across the United Kingdom to change their mindset, to learn to value family, to reduce this incidence of removing children, to think about strengthening families. That was the whole course. So this has always been a really big part of me. Now, after that, I go to work for, as you say, the Family Matters Institute. And whilst I'm there, I was giving a talk at the University of Cambridge. And that's where I met this amazing Lucy Buck, the lady who founded Child's Eye. And she said to me, Jackson, she said, you shouldn't be in this country. And we were in shock. People were like, what? What do you mean? You should be in Uganda.
You are thinking more racism here is
yes, exactly. I'm saying, look at this racism following me. But this lady was saying, you need to be in Uganda and I need to be in the UK. And in Uganda, we've got work that is strengthening families. Everything you're talking about, everything you're telling people here in the government, come, go back to Uganda and see and do it. So I went to Uganda. I packed my bags with my entire family. I hadn't lived in Uganda for about 18 years at that point. And I returned with my son and my wife, and we set up shop. And I was there for 3.5 years. And I'll tell you this, it was the most amazing, yet challenging, yet hardest, eye-opening and humbling time of my life. I had never understood resilience in adversity until I went back to Uganda. Never. Yes. Look, when I tell you that, I want you to understand that the work that I was doing in the UK was with some of the most left behind communities that have experienced serious abuse.
Yes.
And sadly, around me was a give up attitude. When I went to Uganda, I met people who had not given up. People living with all forms and sorts of disabilities, yet finding their way, asking for opportunities that were not being given to them. People who were budgeting with less than £100 a month to live, yet sending children to school to get a decent education, yet ensuring there was food on their tables, whilst also figuring out how they would build a second house or even find ways to earn more income. $100, Jackson, 100. And that's when I learned that, you know something, I have to renew myself. So I call it a humbling period. Now, I'll tell you one last thing before we move on. I was also recovering from lymphoma. I had been diagnosed with lymphoma. And at the same time, I had thought to myself, you know what? There isn't much to live for here. So going through this in Uganda and recovering from lymphoma, I said to myself, first of all the things that I found so important, the car, the money, the what, I said, nope, let me put that aside. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put myself into a mindset that is about making a difference for more people by affecting one to affect the next, to create a movement. So I gave up so much, decided that I would live my life in a new way, new budgets. I wouldn't just look for jobs that were paying so much money so that I could earn so much to do so much. This time I would look for jobs with meaning, or I would create a job with meaning.
That's right.
And so I left and I came back to the UK. My daughter, Tangaza, the light, was born. She was born at home. No one came. We my wife delivered her, and I was the man there who exactly. And I decided to first leave the work I was doing with Child's Eye and go back into my work with masculinity.
I talk about men. You don't have to be good to be a man.
But you don't have to be bad to be masculine either.
No, absolutely.
Right.
Like,
look at The Rock.
Yeah.
Look at The Rock. He's
being masculine is not necessarily a bad thing.
But what is masculinity? Masculinity to me is being kind, is being caring, is being all those things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look at the word.
Supporting men, supporting fathers, redefining masculinity in the way that it should be known, the positive way that it is. So I did some work with His Royal Highness, Prince William, in a charity called Future Men. And I was there for 9 months, 9 transformational months.
Yes.
And I came back to Child's Eye to do my work for our country, a renewed man, reborn. So I hope that's not too long, but that's the story.
Wow, no, that's right on point, and is so much needed. A journey on how you moved from your childhood, your childhood struggles to become the man you are, the education you got, but the process also it takes. What many young people who are listening to us, many times they just think they're going to graduate from Makerere University and boom, they are the CEO of Tangaza Foundation. The process it takes, the turns, and the way God creates our ways without us knowing where it is going to lead us. A few years ago, right before COVID, I'm traveling in the UK to meet with the Lumas Foundation. That's the J.K. Rowling's and the J.K. Rowling's Foundation, and met the then ED, Alex, who told me, Jackson, I love the work you do. I like what you are doing. I like Ugandans doing what they are doing and building strong communities for children. And I know somebody you should meet. And so there is Lumas, J.K. Rowling's out of the UK connecting to Ugandans. And here we are. So go deeper now and tell us a little bit what makes Child's Eye Foundation work unique. And the reason I frame that question that way is there are so many organizations. I know we are creating alternatives to orphanages. There are so many families that have been united with other families and given kids an opportunity to live and to survive. But this is also a system that has been abused in some ways. And so the alternative that you give and what Child's Eye Foundation does is so unique. I didn't have to deal with that in Nyaka or in rural villages of Uganda because communities were still able to provide. So 88,000 children that are living with grandmothers in a community-loving environment are now advocates. We have lawyers you've met, you've social workers who coordinate with your teams, doing so much work because we place them in loving, caring hands of women who are not even related to them. So what is Child's Eye and why the name Child's Eye and what makes it a unique organization it is?
A couple of things. I mean, this is a point for me that is really important because, Jackson, you know, we've had conversations, but to be able to have a conversation like this for others to hear is really important. So first of all, I want to thank and acknowledge that. And our meeting, you know, Alex, we owe a lot to Alex, but he saw in us a really important thing that was going to go beyond the organizations that we were leading. I often used to tell people that I come from a country where we do not give up children, despite what you've heard. You know, people say, but Uganda is where people adopt. I said, yes, but I don't think you understand. People are being forced. They're taking their children away. They're not listening to the community. And when they told me about you, and then they, you know, he gave me your book and I read it. And I told folk, guys, there is an example of an organization. There is an example of a story. There's somebody who tells a story, and I don't know them. I haven't talked to them. They don't even understand this aspect. They're saying, well, this is normal. What are you talking? That's what made a difference for me.
To get Alex, I had met a woman called Leslie Little, who served on the board of Child's Eye. So she made that connection. So Leslie, thank you. Alex, thank you. I know you are both moved up, but we want to make sure we recognize you. And I was supposed to meet J.K. Rowling's when I came to UK, just missed her by minutes. But we'll get her to Uganda one of these days. Child's Eye.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. So Child's Eye Foundation, the child's is obviously ownership of the I. The I stands for interactive. So it really used to be called Child's Interactive Organization. Now, the reason we called it interactive is because it was created to tell stories and connect. Our founder was a journalist. She had worked in television for a lot of her life. And the best way she knew to connect people to causes was through storytelling. And we do have a history and an extremely amazing experience, which we've continued, of storytelling. So that title has been lost in the name and we've kept it that way. So we don't really go around introducing ourselves as that anymore. But if people are wondering, Child's I stands for interactive. That's the reason. What sets us apart? What makes us different? What is the core of what we do? We started out with an orphanage. We had about 28 children in that orphanage. And Lucy Buck, working with Ugandan social workers, quickly realized that every child could go home. And not home to people they didn't know, but home to the families. As you've put it, Jackson, in the rural areas, but even in some of the peri-urban areas, they could go home. Home to people we call Jadja or Kaka, grandparents. Home to Senga, the aunties, to Koja, uncles, to Tata Muto, your father's younger father, Tata Mukulu, your father's younger brother or older brother. We have a community that extends beyond the nuclear family. In fact, my grandmother used to tell me nuclear chichi. She didn't know that word. She only knew nuclear in the sense of danger, missiles. But when you told her nuclear family, she said, there's no such thing as that. Family is the community, the village. Yeah. She used to tell us, I was born as the only child. Her father was polygamous. She was born as the only child of her mother. She told me, so should I disown all the other siblings I have? And yet in the home she grew up with a lady she called sister. So we used to say to her, but you grew up with, as an only child. She says, yes, this was a lady who was in the community. Her parents died and they brought her to live in our home. So she became my sister. Child's I very quickly recognized that every time we put a child in a bed, you take the child and you go out. There's evidence today that tells us that 80 to 90% of children living in institutions, in orphanages, in villages, can go back. 80 to 90% can go back to families where there's parents, community that will look after them.
Yeah.
So once we took the 28 back, we decided to reduce the orphanage to an 8-bed home. And that's when I arrived. But even with the 8-bed home, we realized that paying the costs for an 8-bed home, even if you have one child, is like paying the costs for the house when there's 8 children, because you have to pay the cook, the cleaners, everybody, the watchman, the security, the lights, the food. And you can imagine if you have 100 to 1,000 children, those costs are phenomenal. So we said, let's do away with this concept. Let's do away with this model. Let us instead, if children are being abandoned, if children are struggling, the first thing we did was let us respond at that point and support the families.
Yeah.
But Jackson, we went a step further. We said, listen, instead of supporting them at that point, how about we prevent it from happening? So our work and what sets us apart is we are addressing the root causes of separation. The root causes of separation are many. They even happen in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Canada. Violence in families, family breakdown, influence from gangs, economic instability, discrimination. This is not just a Ugandan issue.
Nope.
We wanted to address those things. So let me use the point of discrimination. We went into communities where there were children living with disabilities and we said, people, where are the children? They said, no, we don't have those children here. We said, no, we know you do. And some of these children, Jackson, were never seen. So we set up peer support groups for those parents. And when they heard that their children could be anything, aspired to be great children, accountants, lawyers, teachers, mechanics, they decided to come out in big numbers and support those children, just like you've done with the grandparents. Child's I addresses the root causes to separation. We are not afraid to stand up for children. We're not afraid to stand up for families. We're not afraid to stand up for the values of African community. In Uganda, where I am from and I can speak confidently about, we do not give up our children. And when you give the community that power back and allow them to make decisions, create awareness, then you change things. Now, a lot of people ask me things like, but aren't children in Uganda discriminated against? I say, look, children across the world with disabilities, some none, are discriminated against. Aren't we running awareness programs in the United Kingdom, in the US, in Canada, in Australia? We are. So that is what we're doing. And better still, we're not doing it in English. We're doing it in their local languages, using stories that emphasize how children have an important place, how family, community, how the rabbit, the hare, and the fox came together to make a difference. That's what sets us apart.
Wow, Chris. As we are talking about all the causes of this separation and what leads children to be separated from parents, incarceration is a big one. It's a big one in the United States. It's a big one in the UK. And these are mostly kids who are from minority families where, unfortunately, the justice system is more leaning towards incarcerating more people of color than the white Caucasian people. But
Yes.
it's also mental health illnesses that are not diagnosed in our societies. I like the fact that you mentioned children who are like on the spectrum of autism or who are physically disabled and are kept away from society because of belief systems. But I'm glad you are doing this work. I'm glad you are doing it on a large scale. And I'm so excited to see it go from rural areas of Uganda now leading into partnerships that you brought to PG. So you did this work around the capital city of Uganda. You abolished the orphanage completely. Child's Eye has grown. We meet, and now we are we have formed a partnership officially that we plan to scale into every district of Uganda and then take it beyond. I am going to do an introduction to you soon with a former model called Noelle. Noelle is from Congo. She has a school in Congo.
Yes.
And I've talked to her about getting the judges. Now I don't know what they call judges in Lingala, but we'll find out soon. But we want these grandmothers from Ghana to South Africa to Nigeria, up to Egypt, to Detroit, to Cambridge, UK, Cambridge, USA, to take up the mantle of looking after children, because every child deserves to be loved. And every child deserves a home. And we all know that home is not going to be in orphanages. In fact, people ask me all the time, who is the biggest donor for Nyaka? And I tell them openly, grandmothers, Nyaka grandmothers.
That's right.
When you take 88,000 children and think of how much it costs to house each of that child every night, 365 days of the year.
That's right.
Think of how much it costs to wake up at night and go check on that child. Think of medical support and housework you would hire.
That's right.
Think of dinner.
That's right.
For children, and breakfast, and the water bill, and the lighting bill, and the smile and love that comes with it in that package. You cannot quantify your $1 million donation and think you are the biggest donor. The grandmother continue to be the biggest, and community members, whether they are gogos or judges or mukaka or tatamuto. And extended family in African context has always been the people that assimilate. I remember my father going to funerals when I was a child, and he would come back with a child.
That's right.
And mom would say, what happened? He said, their mother died. Since you are still here, and as well help this child. The Julia says the kids that grew around were because somebody died, you came with a child, you fed them, you take care of them. So you've taken this, you've grown the organization. I met your management. I want also to pay respect to your former ED in Uganda.
Right. That's right.
In peace, our sister who passed away recently, but she passed away after she had already bought a year of partnership between this little organization you talked about in southwestern Uganda and now bringing it to PG. How is that looking? What are the prospects? What should people know about it as they prepare to receive it in their districts and their countries?
No, thank you, Jackson. Thank you. So absolutely. First, leading on from your words, I want to also pay respects to Susan. And I remember that meeting of the three of us in Kampala at the office. Actually, Grandmother's Project is a legacy partnership as part of our honor for Susan. So Child's Eye launched a new strategy at the beginning of this year. We call it Family. And the second objective in that strategy is an objective that Susan really wanted to see. And it's about developing partnerships to scale the work, learning from others how they've done it, and also bringing elements of our own. And Nyaka was a partner we had identified, obviously, through the relationship we had, but Susan and our colleagues in Uganda, the management there, really made sure they brought it together. The Grandmothers Project is phenomenal because that word means something to every human being across the world. I mean, the day you told me about the project, the day you said to me, you want grandmothers everywhere, I understood the task. I understood it. I said, and I don't even remember this, I said, say no more, I will be back. I left the room and I came back. We did a piece of work, actually, when I was at Cambridge Family Matters Institute called Grandparents Matter. And we asked people, what is the role of grandmothers and grandfathers in society? And they told us these things. I pulled it up. Providing emotional support, passing down traditions, providing childcare, being a role model, contributing to the community, and being the core on what family is modeled on. Our project, our partnership, Nyaka and Child's Eye, is going to not only demonstrate that this core of society is key and important in holding intergenerational traditions, but also in ensuring that our communities remain safe. By the way, my grandmother used to tell me, we are the warriors of our community. She says, you know, they think that you have to train people, but if you want to stop messing with the community, they say, bring the grandmothers out. And our colleague Dixon in Zimbabwe did the same thing with his mental health project. He said, look, I see my people are struggling. Let me bring the grandmothers.
Yes.
So we're going to not only demonstrate, but we're also going to show how we can prevent the separation in family. We have learned from Nyaka that when a generation is lost, when our families and our children, some of us, our uncles, our brothers, our sisters passed on from HIV, from AIDS, we didn't have to give up our children. In fact, in Uganda, that is not where the orphanage started. It started afterwards. So we're demonstrating that we can prevent separation with this core of society, these grandmothers. We're demonstrating that if children can't live with their biological parents, that the grandparents in those communities can be the alternative. And we're also demonstrating economic support and economic strength through, by the way, a community that's been forgotten. And that is your model, though. Because when I met some of the grandmothers from Nyaka, and they were so proud, as you often say, about their assets. You know, I often tell this story to my friends. I say, name your assets. I said, I met a grandmother in a rural area who could name her assets. Her plastic chairs that she rents out. The fact that she used that to build a house next door. I mean, it's phenomenal. So we are taking that, learning from your team that is embedded in the community, the grandmothers who themselves are leading it, not some fancy consultant from, and please forgive me for this, from the UK, from the United States that's written a program on how grandmothers in Africa should do the work. No, the real consultants are these amazing women in their communities with lived experience who understand what it means to lose everything, to lose your children, to have nothing, to go through adversity. We're taking that model, we're learning about it, we're working with local government, we're working with representatives to local government, representatives to the members of parliament or parliamentarians, so that we can place this in the center, so that we can show that if you can do it in one area and do it in another and scale, then as you say, Jackson, we can do it in 146 districts in Uganda, in all the countries of Africa, and demonstrate it as something everywhere in the world.
There we go. You've set the task. The soldiers are being trained, and we go. Kampala KCCA is already warming up for community-led grandmothers approach. Busia is lining up, Karamoja is lining up, Congo, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Ghana is actually next week. I had a meeting with a Ghanaian colleague right here at Harvard who had me speak at the business school here at Harvard.
Oh, yes.
Brother, I have the resources, I have the offices, I am ready. Bring your team and the concept, and we'll go start it right away. The moment you mention grandmothers, like you say, everyone knows what it means, whether they are here. I've only met one person my entire life who told me their grandmother beat them so bad. They associate a grandmother as that mean person. My friend, I won't say his name. I will say his name, Rolf, my friend Rolf, because he said, Jackson, please, when you are talking about the work, talk about the children. Grandmother does not. One, I am 53 years old. I've met one person who said the grandmother is synonymous too. You took every parent who have beaten their children and abused them and make all dads bad, then we would not also have bad. But think of 20,000 grandmothers we have now, and triple this number, quadruple them. The fire needs to be lit. Grandmothers can make a difference, or people who don't use the same word can use women who are taking care of communities.
That's right. And with your permission, let me just take that number you have used. You know, we claim in Uganda that there's about 50,000 children growing up in orphanages. Okay, it's not really verified, but approximately 50,000. Now, the 20,000 grandmothers, you know, these children can all fit into a family home. Even if we took and doubled that, all the children in orphanages can be moved out and placed in a loving family home.
If the number is estimated at 50,000 orphans in orphanages in Uganda, Nyaka has already surpassed that number.
That's it.
88,000 children in Rukunjiri, Kanungu, and Rubanda living with the 20,000 grandmothers. And for those of you who don't know the program really well, these grandmothers are all business owners and entrepreneurs. I've spoken about starting businesses and how Uganda is listed as one of the countries that has so many entrepreneurs.
That's right.
I think they claim our grandmothers. That's what puts the number so high.
Pushed it.
Whether they sell mangoes on the side of the road, whether they sell cell phone cards or tomatoes, these women are entrepreneurs. And with the expansion of just little cash, e-business, take their grandchildren to teach them some technology of transfer money, fintech, this will spread all over the world, creating systems that will grow our communities. I want to get into your leadership style.
Yes, sir.
Leading your child's eye.
Yeah.
And serving on multiple boards around the world. What style? Why are these organizations all running to Chris Muwanguzi to serve on the boards? What are they looking for?
Okay, I mean, that's interesting. So I went on a program 11 years ago at the it was LSE, London School of Economics, and the City Business School. And I remember them talking to me about leadership styles and how leaders do their thing. And then, you know, they went through the traditional 5 areas of leadership: servant leadership, transformational leadership, and all that. And of course, I really, I was very drawn to that idea of how I think about my leadership. But to answer your question, my leadership comes from the way that I was raised. It comes from the way that I've learned about the world. I've lived in 4 different countries in my life. And that's not many. There are people who have lived in 17, they've traveled, they're here for 3 years, they move on. Me, only 4. But interestingly, those 4 countries are on 3 different continents. And therefore, the culture is very different, right? We know this. You understand what I'm saying,
yes,
right?
I know where you're coming from.
My leadership style has come from what I call listening leadership, reflective leadership,
yes,
to effect transformation. And I learned to be able to talk this way from meeting folks like you who I admire, who are able to say, look, I'm not going to be that light bulb that goes dim when I should be lighting bright so that others can see, so that when I need those bright lights to shine, they're all shining. So let this light of mine shine, Jackson. That's my leadership style. The reason why I have been humbled enough and lucky enough to serve in various boards across the world is because I have not let that light not shine. So wherever you are, whether you're in a little village in Mukunjiri, in Mbarara, in deep in Congo, shine, shine, shine. Do not let your light switch off. We are all born to shine so that others can recognize when it's their time.
You have started. You have started a sermon now. I might ask you to sing the closing song. Let the little light shine. There's a preacher behind that voice. I can hear it. Present a preacher, but listening, reflective, transformational leadership. And this is going to lead into the next question I'm going to ask you. I was going to say, how do you want to be remembered? At one time, we all go.
Wow.
This thing many people don't want to recognize, but in my fundraising, I always tell people, how do you want to be remembered? And how do you want your legacy to look like? Whether it is the work you've done or the children you've raised. One day people will look back. How do you want them to remember Chris Muwanguzi?
What a powerful question. What a powerful question. My wife asked me the other day, what is the most important thing in my life? And I will answer your question in the same way. And I told her it is to be the father for my children. Now, I want to be remembered as a father, as a dad, who didn't stop at his children, but cared enough to want other children to live the life that my children have lived. And by that, I don't mean that they had everything, but that they have a happiness, that they have presence. I always say, and the reason I tell you this, Jackson, and the reason I want to be remembered this way is that I don't want people to say, oh my goodness, your father was amazing. And my children say, oh, wow, he never had time for us. He was out there saving all the other children in the world. I want them to say, yeah, he was a father at home here. We know who you're talking about, because that love, that care, that commitment he demonstrated for his world, for a better world, he demonstrated at home. I want to be remembered as a father, Jackson, as a good father. That's what I want to be remembered as. A good father that cared enough to take the gospel from my home, to let the light shine again.
Wonderful. Shine it at home and shine it all over the world.
That's right.
And if somebody asks you to give advice to your young self, now we've gone from being remembered legacy to Chris Muwanguzi at 18 years old, 21. What advice would you have given yourself at that age?
Save. Well, actually, no. Save, invest, and spend a little. That's it. Save, invest, spend a little. Yeah.
Live within your means.
Yeah. I did it the other way. I invested a little and didn't save at all. So 18, save, invest, spend a little.
All right, young people, you've heard the message. The audience has heard you. I have asked you several questions. I know we cannot exhaust the list of things we can talk about. Is there something I didn't ask you that you would like to share with our audience?
No. I mean, the only thing I probably didn't talk about was I have two beautiful children. One is 10, one is 5. My son, who they called Christopher Jr., not me. They called him that. Now I have to live up to the name. And my amazing daughter, Nia Tangaza. That's the only thing. But other than that, we've spoken about it all. And you're right, we can't exhaust it, but you have surprisingly done it.
Well, to do that with a trained journalist who started as a young man and now who's grown to be an amazing father, husband, but also an advocate for children, advocate for girls, advocate for strong communities. Chris, it's an honor. I am humbled you've made time to do this. To our audience, please continue to share, subscribe, learn, relearn, and unlearn as we all grow together through TJK. Thank you, and have an amazing evening, morning, night, wherever you are in the world.